This tutorial provides a little addendum to the first one that I posted, which I actually did early in the weekend or Friday. I forget when I actually recorded it. But since I didn't get that posted anyway, and I figured not too many of you were going to be working on this over the weekend, I spent a little more time working on the AutoCAD file and actually discovered a few other issues that were there because I didn't draw this file. I got the file. It was done by an engineering firm. And of course, they weren't thinking about the process of using this to do 3D modeling. They were simply constructing working documents for the garden. And because of that, they used a few methods and techniques that really don't work too well. So some of those have to do with the blocks, which I'll mention later. But in this respect, there were just some layer organizational issues, gaps, corners that didn't line up, and that creates problems when you bring it in SketchUp because it wants closed surfaces in order to make surfaces from them. It wants closed lines. So anyway, since I fixed those things, it actually changed the process a little bit. I still want you to watch the first video, and hopefully you've already done that, because it shows you how to solve some of those problems, because my experience working on this isn't unusual, and you will get files from other people and find out, well, if you want to use these to model in SketchUp and in some, even in Rhino, there are things that you want to clean up to make it work better in 3D as opposed to just 2D. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I went over those in the first video, but I just wanted to touch on two before we export this and really focus on SketchUp and how we connect things there. The first one is flattening geometry in your AutoCAD file to make sure there's no elevations in them, except of course for the contours. And the second is exploding the polygons that have arcs in them so that we end up with arcs in SketchUp instead of little line segments. So to do that, I'm going to start by, first thing I'm going to do is layer isolate all the flat work, the hardscape, the things that sit on the ground plane, paving edges, that kind of thing. Again, most of these, all I need to do is select one element on the layer with the layer isolate. Boundary line. All right, I don't know why this keeps happening. I just did this a minute ago. Let's try this again. Didn't have the tool selected. Isolate. Again, edges of pavement. These seating areas. To get the curve down here, it's part of the ground plane there. And again, just for safe measure, if I'm not sure, I'll just click on another one. Edge of the building kind of forms that boundary on the outside, so I want that. Now let's try that. There we go. So that's a good cross section for this particular model. All the things that are going to be imprinted on the ground plane or touch the ground plane as a surface, not just an element. And the building I put in, even though there's going to be a structure there, because it creates a boundary for the edge of the planting beds and the lawn. So the first thing I'm going to do is flatten, and this just takes all, if any of these elements have Z elevations that are greater than 0, it puts them to 0. If it asks you to remove hidden lines, you want to make sure it says no, so you can type an N and enter. And you won't really see any different. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything second time. I flattened it, and now I'm just going to explode it. I lost my polylines here. That's all right, because in SketchUp, polylines don't exist. They're just lines. But what now I have is I actually have arcs instead of arcs within polylines, and that's what I want. So now I'm going to back out, click on Layer Unisolate, and go through that process again. So this time I'm going to select the topo as well. Again, I'm going to make sure I get all these pieces, and again, you want to make sure if you're really well organized with your layers, this is pretty quick and easy. If you're not organized, you might have to do it a couple times to be able to get what you want. I think these are all on the same layer, so let's enter. So yeah, that looks pretty good. I've got the boundary, and again, this is a boundary that I put in AutoCAD to give me an edge for the site model in SketchUp and an edge for the 2D surfaces that we're going to create first. It's not part of the original drawings, but I needed it in order to create that boundary. And you'll see how that works in a little bit. All right, so I've flattened everything with the contours. I've exploded all the polylines, so make sure I have arcs. And now I'm ready to use the W block command. And I'm going to choose select objects first. Right click. I'm going to pick a location. I made a new folder for this. And I'm going to call this Hardscape. Let's add topo to that as well. Now, usually you could export those things separately, but in this case, since the topography, the contours have elevation, they won't come in touching anything on the ground plane, because that's one thing. If you had other elements that you wanted to bring in eventually, like there's boulders in here, I don't want those boulders connecting to the lines that they overlap on the edges of the pavement, and I don't want those to be imprinted on the ground plane. We're going to bring those in separately, create surfaces out of them, extrude them, and then drop them down onto the terrain model. So topo and then the rest of the hardscape is okay together. Okay, so I've W blocked that. That just simply writes out an AutoCAD file that has that information in it and nothing else. And now I'm going to go to SketchUp. We're going to get Steve out of here. And remember, when I choose File and Import, and I've got my AutoCAD files, click on Options and make sure Preserve Drawing Origin is checked. Let's see where demo W blocks. Bring this in. And I can't see it because I'm looking at 0, 0, 0, and this drawing has been geo-referenced, so it's not near here. So I'm going to click on the zoom to extents, and there we go. We've got the topo, and we've got the drawing separately. So we'll get to the topo in a second. Let's start with this. First thing we do is make surfaces out of the 2D lines. Then we'll create a terrain model from this topography, from the contour lines, and then we'll drape this onto the terrain model. So to start with this, we've got kind of a sequence we go through. We've imported it, and there's a couple little plugins you can use to really help clean things up in here. So the first one, I selected everything, the 2D geometry right here, not the contours, and go to extensions and extend close lines, and it says 16 edges were extended. That finds places where in the translation process something didn't get quite connected up, and it extends them so it matches. And usually that happens around arcs because the arcs come in as an approximation. And you can change the segments. I could have bumped them up a little bit, but for right now, they look pretty good. So, you know, even if I zoom in, they're pretty smooth. So I just wanted to do that extend close lines. Then I selected everything. I'm going to right click on one of the lines and choose generate faces. Okay, so it's starting to get some of these faces filled in. Then I'm going to select everything again, right click and choose intersect faces with selection. Again, this is just kind of connecting up the geometry as we go. And since I've done that again, I'm going to select it, right click and choose generate faces again. So you can see it even just by repeating through that. I'm going to repeat, and it looks like there's a little tiny line in here. Just going to get rid of that. Select it again. And use another little extension called delete short lines. You don't want to use this one early on because you can end up losing lines that are floating by themselves. Once we've got a lot of the surfaces connected, it won't affect anything that's part of it. So it erased another 9 edges, and those are those little pieces that just happen to go over the edge of an arc or a segment. And as long as that's sitting there, SketchUp, and it's still connected to the line, it won't make faces. So I've done that. Everything's selected, right click, generate faces. And now you can see it's kind of filled that in, and that's exactly what we want. We want to be able to come in here and click on each part of this and have it be separated from the other part. Okay, so that's the first step. We want to make sure we get this 2D version of the site plan. And I'm just going to change locations of these. It's not really necessary, but I'm going to move this straight up. I'm going to grab the contours, move them down. They come in at the actual, you know, their elevation, so it doesn't really matter where they're floating for right now, but I just wanted to, makes more sense when you think about the drape to put these below. So now let's look at the contours. We're going to use a little plugin called Topo Shaper. The Terrain from Contours tool, this will work, but this creates a much better terrain that we're going to work with. So I'm not going to demonstrate the other one in the video to save time, but I'll do it in class. So click on Topo Shaper, It will give you this preview. Just click on, there are a few gaps. We can close these, but it's not necessary. Just click Calculate Terrain and then Generate Terrain. And then click outside that to exit. And the contours are still selected, so just hit the delete key and get rid of them. Okay, so there's really quickly, it makes a really nice terrain. And the great thing about TopoShaper is it's a terrain with a regular square mesh that's triangulated on the diagonal. We can use the artisan tools to manipulate it if we need to. Now there is a step in here which we can use to start changing, modifying the terrain. I'm not going to show that in this video. I'm going to skip over that. We'll talk about it in class. It's kind of an optional step if you want to work with it a little bit. But let's go on to the next step. So we've got the terrain. I'm actually going to explode that. So we have just the top surface ready and the base is still part of a group. I'm going to select my surfaces, use the drape tool. This is part of the Sandbox Tools. Move over this, click, and then watch down here. As long as this is showing this progress bar, don't click anything, don't touch anything. Just let it go. Sometimes it takes a little while, but it'll get done. It's looking at all these lines up there on the 2D version, and it's figuring out how they intersect with that terrain mesh that's down below. When it's done, get your select tool. You can zoom back in. Now, ideally, when you click on this, it'll be exactly the same as up above, but hey, we don't live in an ideal world, right? There's always some little issue here. And you can see there's a couple here, and I usually turn on the hidden geometry to see that. So when you see a thick line, you know something's going on. So usually I just go in there and delete that, use the line tool, kind of reconnect those, and as soon as that dark line disappears, you know you've got it. So for whatever reason, the plugin just doesn't quite get that. Well, I can see there's a little teeny line segment right there that it doesn't really like. Since I know this is a planar surface, there's no need to have 3 pieces of line in there. Just if you go from hidden line to hidden line, and this is the same issue. This is usually what happens. There's just extra line segments. So if you just delete those and just go from endpoint to endpoint, it should connect. We go back to hidden geometry. And so we've got a couple little surfaces there that we had to fix. Other than that, everything's working really well. And you know, the true test is you can go in and grab the paint bucket and whatever colors or textures you want, and you know, add those in here and be able to see the variations in color without it bleeding into something else. There's the roadway out there, a little darker for our walkways. Okay, maybe a little darker yet. That, and that's what we want. We want all those things separated out in order to be able to apply separate textures. And later on, we'll talk about how to manipulate the landforms. There's a couple areas like where the retaining wall is here. We're going to have to fix this a little bit in order to get the terrain to look right inside of it. And there's a little circle, seating circle here that's supposed to be a little more level. And if we look at the hidden geometry, you know, it's average. You can see it forming a little bit here, like this is leveled out and then it slopes down, but it's still actually a little too sloping. And I'll go over how to do that in another tutorial and in class. But this is the process that you use to go from AutoCAD to SketchUp. We import it. We form the 2D surfaces up here, make sure they're completely closed. We form the terrain model from the contours using TopoShaper, and then we drape this onto the surface. And any anomalies that occur in that process, you clean up, and then the test is to be able to fill this with textures and make sure that each individual space or surface is distinct from the other one.